Firefighters answering a 000 call to Hunter Street faced an inferno. Witnesses reported smoke and flames billowing from the derelict tailor's cycle and mower shop at about 7 p.m. Within minutes, the brick building was a fiery cauldron. Brigades from Cooks Hill and Hamilton turned out, but as the blaze intensified, they called for backup from a ladder truck and another unit from Torres Hill. The block adjoining the Newcastle TAFE College was earmarked for demolition as a result of irreparable earthquake damage and had been cleared of contents. However, oil and petrol, which had soaked into the floorboards below the repair shop, now served to fuel the blaze. Another unit from Carrington was called in as firefighters concentrated on saving the Hunter Street TAFE College on the adjoining eastern side of the block. Incredibly, the building hadn't been evacuated.
Your building's all right? Out!
The battle raged for more than an hour. Newcastle residents watched the pall of smoke and flame from kilometres away. Morning revealed the extent of the damage. Only the facade and charred timbers remained. Scientific police are still trying to establish what sparked the blaze. In the meantime, the owner of the gutted block, State Rail, has a pressing demolition job. And there's a footnote to the story. Firefighters today revealed they were inspired by a secret weapon last night. Throughout the battle, they kept a close ear on the Newcastle Knights Rugby League playoff against Balmain.
5 men on a large line of hose with large amounts of pressure were battling the flames and making forward progress, probably a little bit similar to the Newcastle pack in the scrum. There was a chant going, come on Knights, as the line was progressing through the building.
When the RAF's Hornets go into combat, they take people like Andrea Tardant with them every step of the way. While it may be the pilots who are sitting in the cockpit, it's the ground control intercept officers or the GCIs in the radar rooms on the ground that pinpoint not only their every move, but also that of their enemy, the bandits.
They class us as being their unseen wingmen, ground-based of course, but we do control them in close control, telling them where the targets are coming in, clearing their 6 o'clock, as in behind them, in case somebody's going to shoot them down, giving them the big picture, the best picture of where the enemy is coming from, advising them on what directions to fly and how to get out of there if they're in trouble.
Such is the amazing stress and pressure of such a job that only a small number of GCIs make it all the way to the top of their field. Andrea Tardant is one of them. She joined the RAF at 19 years of age, only the second female ever posted to air defence. Within a year, she was sitting solo at the radar controls, calling the shots in the training missions that helped to shape our flying fighter force. But while they may be one step away from the real thing, Andrea insists she can never afford to think of her job as anything but life and death.
I consider that it's vital for the pilot's safety of all participants, that I consider that they are in a live combat situation. I think we all get the best training effort from that.
Andrea leaves next week for her new base, RAF Boulner at Northumberland in England. It's just 40 minutes north of Newcastle too. Selected from an elite field, she will spend just over 2 years there, training in her role as Officer Commanding Initial Training, a job she believes will not only be a learning experience for her students, but for herself as well.
The complexity of their operations in Europe and with NATO far exceeds any of the standard operations that we have here. Mind you, we have one of the leading forces in Australia, in the world that is. Our fighter pilots and controllers are numbered as some of the best in the world.
Although there were few queues for most of the day, petrol retailers have reported a marked increase in sales. A steady stream of customers taking their last chance at petrol before the price freeze ends. This petrol station normally pumps 10,000 litres a day. Today, twice that amount will pass through the Bowsers.
Actual petrol sales have doubled over the last few days. It's been quite heavy here. our worst time is this evening, so we expect a very busy night.
Many people have been filling containers and jerry cans, hoping to stockpile the cheaper fuel. Fire authorities say there are strict limits to the amount of fuel which can be stored at home and have called for motorists to exercise great care. But while most are bemoaning yet another increase to the cost of living, one service station owner was able to offer this philosophical observation: what goes up doesn't always go down. John Church, NBN News.
The Chamber called a media conference late today to stress the seriousness of the situation. Members cited several factors which are accelerating the decline, but put the high value of our dollar and interest rates at the top of the list.
It's not that Australian manufacturing, primary and secondary industry has earned this higher value. It's that there are forces acting upon it from outside which are working to our disadvantage, and a prime factor from within is the maintenance of very high interest rates.
The Chamber says the recent federal budget does nothing to stimulate exports and that business bankruptcies are running at record levels due to a combination of reasons, including company tax changes.
If the mix is not done right, then we look at a downturn that's going to be much harder and much longer than it may have been if it was better managed.
The ACTU also came in for criticism for mounting a wages push at a time when industry is already on its knees, and if things get worse, jobs will go.
But if the market forces become so great that we're just non-competitive and we've got no volume, obviously we're not going to keep people there doing nothing.
Chamber President Bob Kelly of RZ Mines and Rob Chenery of BHP will explain further the difficulties faced by industry on Newsnight tonight on NBN at 10:30.
Once again, video manipulation by Saddam Hussein delivered the latest news. It started when he appeared with another group of hostages, telling them he would welcome a television debate with who he described as his opponents.
Seed Bush with Seed Thatcher.
I'm prepared now, ready and prepared for direct talks and dialogue with Mr. Bush and with Mrs. Thatcher.
Then, from one of the detainees, a critical question.
Perhaps the gesture of sincerity be the release of some of our women and children.
A short time later, he had his answer. The unpredictable Saddam apparently agreed, and television news announced all Western women and children in Iraq would be permitted to leave the country, possibly as soon as tomorrow. What wasn't clear was whether it would apply to Westerners in Kuwait. Saddam's decision caught Western governments by surprise, but despite their scepticism, rescue plans immediately went into place. There are 80 Australian women and children trapped in the crisis. If Saddam Hussein keeps his word, they could either be flown out to Dubai or Bahrain with British and Americans, or make an arduous journey by road to Jordan. While Saddam Hussein appears to be displaying new compassion, he's still increasing his grip on Kuwait. Today, Iraqi maps were redrawn, and Kuwait appears as the country's 19th province, its capital, Kuwait City, renamed.
In Washington, a sceptical response to the announcement that women and children would be released, the view being Iraq's broken too many promises for its word to be trusted. As for Saddam Hussein's offer of a TV debate with George Bush and Margaret Thatcher,
it's sick and it doesn't even deserve a response. Unanimously, the world is condemning what Saddam Hussein had done, with almost an exception to a country. So what is there to debate?
a long way from the centre of the crisis, a casualty at Kennebunkport. George Bush got a fishhook caught in his ear. A doctor was called in to remove it. Only a flesh wound, though, that didn't stand in the way of a last big catch before the President interrupted his holiday to return to Washington to brief congressmen on the crisis. After the Bush administration privately talked up the possibility of the US taking a first strike against Iraq, it's now sending out a different message, that it wants to concentrate on using economic sanctions to bleed Saddam Hussein. That's the impression Australian Foreign Minister Gareth Evans got after being briefed in Washington by senior administration officials.
Working down the sanctions track was very much the centrepiece of US strategy and thinking at the moment.
Gareth Evans was given a ceremonial colour guard on his arrival at the Pentagon, a thank you for the 3 ships Australia's sending to the Gulf. He says it's unlikely we'll be sending any more. He was more hopeful the crisis could be settled peacefully.
It's well known fighting cancer is highly expensive. The generosity of the local community has helped offset that cost with $1.5 million in telethon donations for treatment and research. An important part of that research is Professor Gordon Burns. Speaking tonight at Newcastle University, Professor Burns said there was new hope in the cancer war.
There have been tremendous advances in the last 6 months in particular. I think the major discovery has been that there can now be isolated products called genes, pieces of DNA from cells that can switch off cancer cells and stop them behaving abnormally.
In association with PhD students, Professor Burns is working on similar studies, learning about proteins in cancer cells. The professor says it's vital that funds like the Telethon Trust continue to support research and allow young academics to advance the search for a cancer cure.
And this is a quest for information. This is real basic knowledge. And I think if we're going to attract the best students to stay in Newcastle, and this indeed has happened, some of our best students were going to leave and have now come, then I think it's important that Newcastle continues to do this type of work.
Meanwhile, in the Hunter, budget-conscious motorists were well advised to shop around before filling their tanks. Many stations were still selling fuel for less than 70 cents per litre, and even the boys in blue were keen to take advantage of the unexpected bargain.
Do you guys usually come in here, or did you pull in because you saw it was still at the cheaper price?
Oh, mainly due to the cheaper price, that's all.
How are you going to feel about paying 73 cents a litre for it?
It's going to be hard. It makes you want to ride your push bike a lot.
They weren't the only ones promoting the push bike theory.
I think it's about time the government took a few of their taxes off and gave the motorist a bit of a fair go. Soon we'll all be on push bikes.
Elsewhere, drivers were resigned to paying the higher price, but still none too happy about it.
Not impressed at all. It shouldn't be allowed.
It'd be nice to know how the prices were figured out and whether they're working on stocks they've still got or whether they're actually working on the new prices to them. It's very tempting to take a little extra profit margin in a situation like this.
Service station owners say they've been copping the brunt of the motorists' anger, but claim they're not the villains.
The reason it's too dear is because the government are getting too big a share of it. The government are getting something like 35 to 40 cents a litre, and the average service station operator's on about 5 cents a litre. So you only have to put 2 and 2 together and work out why the stuff's so dear.
Prices at all stations are expected to soar above the 70-cent mark by next week. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
This building in Broadmeadow was once a 10-pin bowling alley. In 1973 it housed Newcastle's mailroom. 4 years later it became the first country mail centre in New South Wales, sorting post for an area as far north as Taree. But it was recognised several years ago that its days were numbered.
Mail volumes are increasing so much over the past 12 months, and the increases we expect over the next couple of years are such that we need a new building.
That building will be 3 times the size of the current exchange and will be built on Australia Post land in Colestorman Close, Warrabrook, at a cost of $8.5 million. Earthworks will begin next month, with tenders for construction called before Christmas. It is expected to be operational by early 1992. Perhaps the most exciting news is the addition of $10 million worth of new electronic equipment, which will take over the current hand sorting of mail. This machine represents stage 1 of the new technology. It stamps the mail. But the new machinery will process 32,000 letters per hour compared with the current 1,200, reading the postcodes or towns and sorting it to 380 destinations. Also outdated will be the traditional mail bags, to be replaced by new steel containers. 60 containers will do the work of 2,500 mail bags. But the bad news is the new technology will mean a reduction in staff.
In the long term, it will be some staff losses involved, but we need to look at exactly what we're going to do in that regard.
The new building's lifespan is expected to be only 20 years. By then, it's anticipated the increasing volume of mail will need to be handled by even more advanced technology. Rebecca Skinner, NBN News.
It's well known fighting cancer is a highly expensive battle. The generosity of the local community has helped offset that cost, with more than $8 million donated from the 1983, 85 and 89 telethons for cancer treatment and research. $1.7 million of that support went to the Telethon Trust for the NBN Chair of Cancer Research. Headed by this man, Professor Gordon Burns, it's a community commitment to find answers to the cancer problem.
All the improvements, all the advances in cancer research and understanding cancer and the hopes for cure are incremental. They're all small points made by many groups throughout the world. We're part of the world community. We get cancer. It's important that we contribute towards this.
Presenting his inaugural lecture on cancer research at Newcastle University last night, Professor Burns said scientists from throughout the world are making progress.
There have been tremendous advances in the last 6 months in particular. And I think the major discovery has been that there can now be isolated products called genes, pieces of DNA from cells that can switch off cancer cells and stop them behaving abnormally.
In Newcastle, the cancer chair is working in a similar field, learning about human genes which may be transplanted into cancerous cells to block the disease. Professor Burns says it's impossible to put a time on a cancer cure, but stresses it's vital that funds like the Telethon Trust keep supporting young academics in the battle.
I think if we're going to attract the best students to stay in Newcastle, and this indeed has happened, some of our best students were going to leave and have now come, then I think it's important that Newcastle continues to do this type of work.
The round-robin series began on Tuesday at District Park Courts in Broadmeadow with 10 8-member teams made up of students from years 7 to 12. In the finals, Hunter played Metropolitan East, and in a close encounter, the Sydney Siders won 7 sets to 5. Across the city at National Park, Newcastle's primary school athletes turned out in force for their athletics carnival. The 500 competitors were vying for spots in the Newcastle team to compete at the regional carnival in Maitland next month. The event was planned for Tuesday at Harker Oval, but recent rains waterlogged that field. It was transferred to National Park, which, ironically, is one of the facilities that may be lost if plans to redevelop the site into parkland succeed.
By asking the private sector to submit proposals for electrifying the rail line, State Rail hopes to reduce costs. A study undertaken by SRA Consultants shows that savings in fuel and maintenance would not be sufficient to compensate for the cost of electrification. It also found freight costs for the coal industry would increase, reducing international competitiveness. With the current rise in the price of oil from the Middle East, electrification looks better than ever. Despite this, the cost of buying new trains and electrifying the dual line is still too high. According to the SRA, depending on what proposals are put forward, the line could be commercially built and operated. 2 local companies are known to be interested in the project. They are Port Waratah Coal Services and Gavenge, a consortium of heavy industry including Ganninans and Varley Engineering. Although State Rail would not reveal the price reached by its consultants, it did say it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Jodie McKay for NBN News.
George Dawes and Audrey Hitchcock from the Charlestown Club advanced to today's final with an easy 26-12 win over the Max Coulson team. Dawes' opponents this afternoon, Cohiba's Sam Lagusa and North Haven's Commonwealth Games gold medalist Daphne Shaw, had to go an extra end before defeating Tony Zermack and earning a spot in the final. But on a green that was running around 13.5 seconds, Lagusa and Shaw opened brilliantly with a 2 and 3 shot end, and from there on they were never in real trouble. Try as they may, Dawes and Hitchcock couldn't match the bowls played by the other pairing. Shaw set up many advantages with superb draws. And Lagusa kept the pressure on by doing likewise. In the end, it was a comprehensive 27 win to Sam Lagusa and Daphne Shaw.
The deaths at Chelmsford represent one of the darkest pages of psychiatric care in Australia. It's alleged Dr. Harry Bailey induced a deep sleep in his patients using large doses of barbiturates and sedatives. More than 40 patients died, scores of others contracted pneumonia, suffered blood clots and personality disorders. A Royal Commission has just finished a lengthy hearing into the deaths at Chelmsford, but the inquiry's terms of reference included the use of deep sleep therapy in other New South Wales hospitals. There was surprise then when allegations surfaced today that sleep therapy was used in a Newcastle hospital in the 1950s. The William Lyne Hospital at Waratah had 2 special wards set aside for use by one of the region's psychiatrists at the time, Dr. David Moore. The old William Lyne Hospital building has since been demolished, but the Medical Journal of Australia reveals that in 1958, 86 Newcastle patients were treated with sleep therapy. In wards of up to 6 beds, they'd be treated for 2 weeks and kept asleep for up to 14 hours a day using a cocktail of drugs including hypnotic agents and barbiturates. Some of the drugs reportedly used included sodium amytal, potassium bromide and chlorpromazine hydrochloride. The William Lyne block was chosen because it was quiet and removed from the busy Royal Newcastle Hospital buildings. Patients were admitted here for a variety of psychiatric disorders, including schizophrenia, hysteria, anxiety neurosis and obsessional neurosis. And Dr. David Moore in his study admits that sleep therapy had only marginal results at best. But Dr. Owen James says there's a big difference between what was done at Chelmsford and the reported Newcastle study.
Chelmsford produced a form of treatment which was prolonged coma, involving injections or other intragastric administration of drugs. The fact that these patients had to be given amytal, chloral hydrate, which are all oral drugs, and were treated 4 times, 3 times a day, indicated that they were not heavily sedated to the point of deep coma.
Ralph Snowball arrived in the Hunter in the early 1880s to work as a miner, but it was to be with a camera and not a pick that he would carve out a place in Australian history. Unearthed in the basement of a Lambton home 2 years ago, his photographs document in detail a piece of Newcastle that has never been seen before. History buffs Norm Barney and the late Bert Lovett found the 8,000 plus negatives. They're launching a 2-year labour of love.
The late Bert Lovett and I spent 14 months sifting through every negative we found, which was about 8,000. And gradually we sorted them out. With the help of Snowball's records, we were able to identify and date most of the photographs, about 80% of the collection.
As of tonight, the Ralph Snowball collection is an official part of Newcastle's heritage. Handed over to the city, it will be maintained by the City Council, with its many photographs to provide at least a dozen more exhibitions and become a vital research laboratory, providing accurate details for business, history and family records.
If you're looking to restore or renovate buildings of Hunter Street or even Federation homes of the turn of the century, all that material is here.
Traditionally a landscape photographer, Snowball's works concentrate on the outdoors. Featured are the city's harbour, its streets and businesses, the mines and the Lake Macquarie region.